Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about heart failure. Heart is basically a muscular pump. It pumps blood essentially to two places. The first place is your body. The body gets oxygenated blood from the left side of the heart. It uses the oxygen and circulates it back to the right side of the heart, from where it is pumped out to the second place, which is the lungs, where the blood is reoxygenated and sent back to the left side of the heart. Our body has a certain demand of the blood which it requires under certain conditions. For example, if we start exercising, our demand increases, so the heart will start pumping more blood to accommodate for that. So heart failure describes the condition where heart cannot pump enough blood to meet the demands of the body. Heart failure is divided into two types: heart failure with reduced ejection fraction or systolic dysfunction, and heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, that is diastolic dysfunction. To understand these two types, you need to know what is ejection fraction. Ejection fraction is the amount of blood that is pumped out by the left ventricle with each contraction. Normally it is between 50 and 70%. So what happens in systolic dysfunction? In systolic dysfunction, during systole, which is the phase of the cardiac cycle where heart contracts and pumps the blood out of the heart is unable to pump with enough force because the heart muscles are weakened and smaller. So now these smaller muscles, they do not contract enough or squeeze enough as they used to. This causes less blood to be ejected out of the heart with each contraction. Heart failure with preserved ejection fraction or diastolic dysfunction refers to diastole. It is that phase of the cardiac cycle where the heart fills with blood. So it is basically a filling problem. In this type of heart failure, the heart is not filling with enough blood in the first place. And why is that? Because the heart muscles are very large and they're stiff, so they take up more space, leaving less space for the ventricles to fill with blood. It is possible to have isolated heart failure, that is only left side, or isolated right side heart failure. Usually left side heart failure happens first, and that leads to right side heart failure. It can happen in both systolic and diastolic phase. However, I will discuss the systolic heart failure here quickly. We know that the left side of the heart receives blood from the lungs and it is pumped out to the body. So if the left side of the heart is unable to pump that blood out, then all this blood will be backed up into the lungs. So the lungs will be filled with blood. This fluid built up in the lungs is called congestion. That's why heart failure is sometimes called congestive heart failure. Similarly, the right side of the heart receives blood from the body, from where it is pumped out into the lungs. So if the right heart fails to pump this blood out into the lungs, this fluid built up will be in the body now. So there will be congestion, but in the body parts, like in the lower limbs and abdomen, with a patient who has right heart failure. Remember, we can have isolated left heart failure or right heart failure, and we can have both together simultaneously. Similarly, we can have a systolic heart failure or diastolic heart failure, or both together. The heart's ability to meet the demand of the body is called cardiac output. Cardiac output is defined as the total amount of blood pumped out of the heart per minute, and it is a product of stroke volume and heart rate, where stroke volume is defined as the amount of blood pumped out every beat or with each contraction. So if the stroke volume is decreased, the cardiac output will also be decreased because it depends on this variable, so it's going to go down with it. So that's what happens in heart failure. The cardiac output is decreased because the heart is not pumping as much blood per minute due to lower amount of blood being pumped out with each contraction. Heart failure is usually considered as a secondary disease, meaning that it is caused by an underlying condition that already affects the cardiac output, especially affecting the cardiac muscles. For example, in coronary heart disease or hypertension, there is death of cardiomyocytes, the cardiac muscles. So now that the muscles are not working efficiently, they cannot contract efficiently or squeeze efficiently. So the contractility of the heart is decreased, which means that the stroke volume is decreased, leading to decreased cardiac output. Once the cardiac output is reduced, our body activates renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system and the sympathetic nervous system. These are the compensatory mechanisms activated by the body in an attempt to increase the cardiac output. The activation of renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system will increase the reabsorption of sodium in water, leading to volume retention. It will also cause a vasoconstriction because angiotensin is a very good vasoconstrictor. Now, both these factors will lead to increased venous return to the heart, therefore increasing the preload. Preload is the volume of blood in the ventricles at the end of diastole. Now that the preload is more, the heart will try to contract more in an attempt to pump this preload out, which is basically the stroke volume. And since we know that the cardiac output is dependent on stroke volume, it will also increase. Similarly, the sympathetic nervous system also causes vasoconstriction, increases the heart rate and the contractility of the heart, increasing the cardiac output. In heart failure, however, the cardiac output doesn't really increase because the heart muscles are already weak. So all these compensatory mechanisms are actually just putting an extra workload on these cardiac muscles, causing further death of cardiomyocytes, leading in a further reduction of cardiac output. And this vicious cycle continues. That's it for today. If you liked the video, then don't forget to hit the like button. Also do share it with your friends. Take care. God bless you all.